Tengo el honor de darle la palabra a la señora Mari Kluk.
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the Council, and thank you for this opportunity to participate in a very important debate this morning, Voices for Action Against Racism. My name is Mary Kluk. I'm the Vice President of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, the founder and director of the Durbin Holocaust and Genocide Center, and Vice President of the World Jewish Congress. South Africa has an extensive history of exclusion, which tragically continues in different forms today. For almost 50 years, our country encapsulated institutionalized racism. Following our transition to democracy in 1994, both the new government and civil society worked tirelessly to set up mechanisms to educate about, discourage, and protect people from prejudice in all its forms. In the past 3 decades, the culture of tolerance and anti-racism has been eroded due to various factors, which shows that combating prejudice requires constant vigilance. Much of our work is informed by the South African tradition of conciliation, which facilitated our miraculous transition to democracy through dialogue and compromise. As a priority, we always attempt resolution through the process of restorative justice and education. This is not always possible, and at times we are required to seek justice through the courts, but this is always a last resort. In 2008, our country was deeply shaken by an outbreak of xenophobic attacks against foreigners. This began a cycle of violence and indescribable torment that migrants, as well as many South Africans, have been thrust into. A lot of people consider that they're not part of a contribution to this pain, insensitive to the fact that the way we speak to and about one another has led us to this point. What exacerbates the problem is when people in positions of power, not only in South Africa, but globally, see migrants as a danger, deflecting from poverty, the rising unemployment crisis, and the unprecedented climate crisis. With unemployment figures among the youth of our country at close to 70%, the reference by politicians and many others that they are stealing our jobs has created an environment where many foreigners today live in fear of their lives. And without citizenship rights, they feel unprotected by the laws of the country. We've recently hosted and facilitated dialogues for foreigners as a safe space for discussion and decision-making. A small example is how we were active and vocal in our support of the local Chinese community, who at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic were the victims of dreadful abuse and exclusion. Hatred towards the LGBTQ plus community, as well as gender-based violence, has reached record levels in South Africa. The violent riots and looting that swept through parts of our country last July also heightened the sense of instability among citizens. These crises have been exacerbated by government corruption and mismanagement, resulting in poor service delivery of even basic needs. The very difficult material conditions under which so many South Africans live undermines their basic human dignity. It also provides a rich breeding ground for hate. The Durbin Holocaust and Genocide Center is a center of excellence in education, as well as in its wider focus on human rights and the issues of the day, such as racism and xenophobia. The center is uniquely placed to use the platform of the history of the Holocaust to examine the power of the individual for positive change. Every year, thousands of school learners and adults participate in workshops confronting the impact of treating some sectors of society as less than, or the fear of the other. A substantial part of our education curriculum also includes the study of genocide in general and the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda in particular. Our modern learning methodologies are, however, no replacement for the philosophy The true education is not merely about knowledge, but applying knowledge to achieve good. Daily interactions with our fellow human beings is where the hatred begins and where it needs to end. If we unite against hatred and stand up for one another, we can truly tackle the root of it. The South African Jewish Board of Deputies has united against hate as a founding member of the critical national network, the Hate Crimes Working Group, where we are a member of the steering committee representing not only the Jewish community of South Africa, but also the faith-based sector. This Hate Crimes Working Group is a multi-sectoral network of civil society organizations set up to spearhead advocacy and reform initiatives pertaining to hate crimes in South Africa and the region. Members of the network work in diverse sectors, namely LGBTQI, migrants, refugees and asylum seekers' rights, gender-based entities, and broader human rights organizations. When one group is targeted, we all speak up. I have shared a snapshot of our experience and involvement in the crucial work of confronting and preventing racism and hatred and promoting human dignity. This can only be achieved if everyone is aware and involved. Civil society, to representation at the highest level of all decision-making processes, need to advocate for the rights for all. I'd like to end with a passage from Nelson Mandela's biography, A Long Walk to Freedom. And I quote, "No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin, or his background, or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Even in the grimmest times in prison, when my comrades and I were pushed to our limits, I could see a glimmer of humanity in one of the guards, perhaps just for a second. But it was enough to reassure me and keep me going. Man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden, but never extinguished."
I agree with my fellow panelists and all the distinguished speakers. There is a lot to do. And while it's essential to move beyond individual incidents of racism and in fact join together across nations and organizations in solidarity against racism, I would like to close with a short uplifting experience that we had recently as an inspiration to continue our collective work as a matter of urgency. It will also address some of the questions that were made to the panelists around education. 6 years ago, Mr. Msibo Dlamini, a man of prominence in student politics at one of the most prestigious universities in South Africa, uttered vicious anti-Semitic statements that reverberated across mainstream and social media in our country. Mr. Dlamini expressed fulsome admiration for Hitler. He referred to Jewish leadership as devils with uncircumcised hearts, among other utterances. We spent 6 years pursuing him through the South African Human Rights Commission, the courts, to no avail, until last year we received overtures from Mr. Dlamini that he wanted to meet us, and he then explained that he'd been through a process of personal introspection and remorse. And rather than pursuing a punitive approach, we engaged with Mr. Dlamini and willingly agreed to spend an extended period of time of education and reflection at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, after which he wrote a heartfelt apology to the Jewish community, which included, and I quote, "My statements were not only provocative, but also extremely offensive. It is only in retrospect that I began to appreciate how much my statements were both ill-advised and to a certain extent dangerous. What is incredible is that we have developed a really meaningful relationship with Mr. Dlamini. But more important than that, he has become a public figure campaigning for non-racism in South Africa. This is what can be achieved in addressing racism through the process of restorative and reconstructive justice. I thank you.